Welcome to CISS232, scripting in the client-server environment. We all know it's been crazy the last while. This is my addition to the craziness by having my class done in one of three modes. You have three options to view the lectures. You can view them in person in this room. All right. The lectures, given that this is a blended class, the lectures are only on Tuesdays. So there's online material for the rest of the week, and that's my plan going into this. If it's necessary to change that, I'll change that as the semester progresses. Excuse me, you need a mask. I have one that I was, if you could, if you also might want to check maybe security up front would have one. Maybe that'd be closer. That's okay. I will, where was I? I'm not going, so the classes, the classes, there's only one lecture per week. And that will be, the plan is it will be Tuesday. If I need to change that, if we need to revise it for whatever reason, for example, if there was an increase in COVID courses and I had to deliver all the lectures online, I would do that. If people are having trouble, difficulty, and they want me to show up on Thursday, I could do that. So I could make adjustments to the schedule, but that's the plan going into this. All right, is that lectures and labs will be on Tuesdays. The lab immediately follows this class up in BU 210. The lab is optional. All right, you could work on the lab on your own, or you can show up to lab. Especially if you have questions, you probably should show up for lab. All right. So I hope that's clear. I hope that's not too confusing. It's probably less confusing than I made it here. I probably said it more confusing than it actually is. I'm not going to go through all of the material that is online. Stuff is posted to Canvas. Well, you know what everyone knows what Canvas is. Stuff is posted to Canvas, so please take the time to view it. All right. Okay. So I'm not going to go over the syllabus, and I'm not going to spend any more time going over the stuff I said I'm not going to go over. All right. It's out there. Please read it. You're responsible for knowing it. All right. So I hope this class offers you flexibility as far as meets your needs, as far as, you know, attendance, work schedule, changing and all that. I think this is a good idea regardless. And I think going forward in the future, this will probably be the mode that I'm going to be pursuing for most of my classes, where part of the time it's in person, part of the time it's online. I'm hoping that this works very well. All right, I'm going to start right in on the material in the course. All right, let's start with the title of this course, which is Scripting in the Client-Server Environment. All right, there's three words that I want to talk about in that title: client, server, and then finally scripting. All right, a diagram which I'm going to draw 1,000,000 times, which I probably should save so I don't have to do this each time, is we have a client. If you think that's bad, you should see my actual handwriting. That's probably a lot more legible. We have a client. What do we mean by client when we're talking about a web environment? Who or what is the client? Go ahead. The person is using the website. All right, that's as good a definition as I can think of. All right. In other words, you're sitting at home on your laptop and you access Lorain Community College's website. You want to see if we're getting a snow day today, which, you know, I thought how ironic it would be after not being in the classroom for almost 2 years to have my first day back be a snow day. All right. But we were spared that bit of irony. Okay. So you're at home and open up your browser. We all know what a browser is, right? It's a program that allows us to visit web pages. And we type in loraineccc.edu. All right. Something happens. All right. And we get a response back from someone. And that response is the web page. Now, you could be on your phone as well. All right. You could be on your phone accessing Lorain County Community College's website. You could be on your game console. Trying to think of all the things that have web browsers built into them. You could have a lot, you know, you could access via a lot of different devices. You might not even be a person, all right? Not you personally, all right? But the entity that's accessing the website might not even be a person, all right? What's an example of a client that wouldn't be a person? Any guesses? Yes. Yeah, that could be a case of where a server is accessing another server and pulling data from it. Did you have something to add to that? Yeah, exactly. For example, you know, if you went to, if you went to your favorite band's website, they may have links from YouTube, all right, on their site of the band's videos. I'm very sorry I asked you to do that. Yeah. Okay. Um, we got so far up to talk about clients, what clients are. And we said that they're the person that's accessing the website, and then we decided it doesn't even need to be a person. It could be another computer accessing it. What we'll do very late in this class is, well, I think the last assignment is we'll access a weather website to pull the weather from them and integrate it into our web page. All right. In that case, we're being the client. All right. Probably the simplest way of thinking of a client is an entity that makes requests. So the client makes requests. All right. And that request goes somewhere. Well, it goes through the internet. This represents the internet. All right. It's drawn as a cloud. Yes, that is a cloud. All right. Because we talk about the internet as being a cloud. What does it mean when we talk about the internet as being a cloud? Why do we use that metaphor? Why don't we say it's a railroad station or something like that? Other than the fact that there are no railroad stations. Well, there are, but you know, I actually picked someone up last week that came in on a train. So believe it or not, they still exist. But why do we use the metaphor of the cloud instead of a railroad station? Yes. Yeah, I would say that it's out there, it's floating, it's all connected. The other thing is when we're looking at it from this perspective, we don't care about the details of what's going on in the cloud, right? In a railway station, you need to know that there's a station in Chicago, there's a station in Cleveland, there's a station in Philadelphia, and to get from Cleveland to Philadelphia, you go to this station, to this station, to this station. In the cloud, the metaphor for that is it's just out there. We somehow make our request to the internet, and somehow it gets to where it needs to be. All right. Now, people study that, right? If you take networking classes, you probably study that. All right. But from a software development perspective and a web development perspective, we're not interested in the details of how it gets from here to there. All right. We just know that we make our request there, and somehow it comes out the other end and makes it to a web server. All right, that's the second word in the title of this class that we're going to talk about. Web server. What is a web server? If a client makes requests, what does a web server do? Yes. It repeats. It delivers the response to the request that the server made. So if we type in that we want Lorain Community College's webpage, Lorain County Community College's server takes and delivers that page back to the client. And it goes through the cloud, which means that we don't know how it gets back to the client, but it gets back to the client. So you get the stuff you request, the person next to you gets the stuff they request. All right. And I was very specific in saying the name of those, response and request, because those are the terms that we use. I'm going to have to find a whiteboard where I can type text in, or you're going to be watching me struggle with this for 15 weeks. I draw this diagram in almost every class I teach, all right? Because it's important to know this is how it goes, you know, especially these days, you know, where the web connections are so quick. It just seems like you get websites instantaneously sometimes, you know. It's not like when you were on a 1200 baud modem and you would sit there and you'd watch the page draw itself, all right? There's definitely a process going on, all right? But it happens so quick, it pulls it up. And this is the process. The client asks for something, which we call the request. That request travels through the internet and makes it to a web server, all right? A web server is a machine that, first of all, is listening for requests. You can't ask just any computer out there a question. Like you couldn't ask my computer right now, you know, give me a list of all the spreadsheets that are on this computer. You can't ask that, right? All right. Why not? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, this computer is not running the server software. It's not connected to the internet, and it's not listening for requests. Whereas web servers are connected to the internet and are listening for requests. All right. The other thing is, even for computers that are connected to the internet and are listening for requests, you have to ask for requests in certain formats. All right. So for example, if you type in a web page address like https://loraineccc.edu, you're requesting a web page. That's what the HTTPS means. You're requesting hypertext, and that's the address. That's a valid request. You're following a known protocol, and your request is formatted correctly. Again, to look ahead, that's going to be important later on in the semester when we write code to access a weather site and ask for the weather information, because we are going to ask for it in a certain way, and we're going to get it back in a certain way. And all those things have to be known and agreed upon. We can't just say, hey, what's the weather, right? We have to give the format the request in a certain way, all right? So the request has to be formatted in a certain way and has to be using a known protocol, all right? A protocol is simply an agreed upon way between two entities to communicate. There's protocol in international encounters, right? When the president meets the prime minister of another country and they have dinner, there's a certain protocol that's followed. I don't know what it is, but it is. You know, there's certain rules that you're supposed to follow when you visit the Queen of England. All right, like you don't just go and slap her on the back and say hi, how it's doing. You know, you go up and I think you bow and you whatever. All right. So protocol, you know, everyone sort of agrees to doing it that way. All right. And that's especially important with computers, because if you try to do something that the computer isn't expecting, all bets are off, right? Who knows what you get? So anyhow, that's the request. The response typically is going to be in the form of a web page. Not always, but usually in the form of a web page. All right. It's going to be a web page, or it's going to be other data. All right. For example, when we ask for our web data, we're going to get back what's called JSON data, JSON. That's a particular format. When we ask Lorraine Community College for the homepage, we get back an HTML document. So until later on, we're going to consider most of our responses to be web pages, all right? Because that's sort of the typical interaction that we do most of the time when we make requests to a web server. Now, what's a web page consist of? What are the languages that might be a part of a web page? Yes. Okay, we're going to save Ajax for a minute. Simply put, a web page contains HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Not Java, but JavaScript. So we're getting to the last word of our definition, which is scripting. So we talked what the client does, we talked what the server does, and now we're talking about scripts, all right, JavaScript. HTML serves a certain role on a web page. CSS serves a certain role on a web page, and so does JavaScript. What role does HTML provide on a web page? What does it give you? Yeah, it gives you what the page is comprised of. What's another word for that? It gives you content, all right? Content is a nice generic word because content could be a bunch of text. It could be text with some links interspersed. It could be text with images and links and audio, and it could be whatever. But we can call that the content, all right? So HTML provides the content of the page. It's why we went to that page, right? We went to that page to read the text or to listen to the audio clip or to find links about a particular topic or whatever. So HTML provides the content. The content sort of drives everything. The content is what the user is interested in. All right. What role does CSS provide? Yes. Layout and look. So it's talking about the physical appearance on the page. So the fact that this text is in blue and this text is in green is dictated by CSS. The fact that these letters are so big and these letters are smaller is dictated by CSS. Now, there's some certain defaults in HTML and so on, but generally speaking, if we want to change that as a web developer, we're changing the CSS. And it also handles the layout. In other words, are these two things side by side? Are they on top of each other, or what? You know, I guess with two things, that's the only two options, right? You know, A on top of B, B on top of A then B, B then A, right? So the layout of those things is controlled by CSS. What do you suppose JavaScript does? What role is JavaScript? Yes. Okay, that's all true. From the end user's perspective, what does it give them? If you're explaining this like to a layperson, I don't know, is layperson the right word? Someone that's not technical, all right? Someone that wasn't studying web development. I would use the words behavior or interaction, all right? Interaction is kind of a funny word because you can use interaction a couple different ways, but behavior or interaction. In other words, if I put my mouse here, this happens. That's JavaScript. All right. That's very likely going to be JavaScript. There's ways to do things via CSS2. All right. But for the most part, to simplify things, we can talk about any kind of behavior. You click on the thumbnail, you get a big picture. All right. Typically, that's going to be done via JavaScript. So I would call that the behavior or the interaction on the web page. Now, here's an important thing to remember. JavaScript works on completed web pages. All right. So JavaScript is all about manipulating completed web pages. We might change this image for that image. That's an example of making a change to a completed web page. All right. We may change the color of something. All right. We may change the size of something. We may change the position of something. Anything dealing with the layout or content, so anything dealing with those two things, we can change via JavaScript. We can change the content if we want to. That is, we can change this picture for that picture. We can change the appearance. That is, we can change the color of something. We can change the layout. We can switch positions of things. All right. All that's handled through JavaScript, but it's done typically with completed web page. One thing that you should realize as I'm speaking is almost all the time I say always, I don't really mean always. I mean like the typical usage or most of the time. All right. I think that's a good way to look at it just in life as a general rule, because there's very few things that are cut and dried. 100% of the time it's this way. All right. I'm talking about typically that's what it means. All right. So JavaScript or client-side scripting is manipulating a web page that already exists. Are there other ways of manipulating the page? Are there other programming languages other than JavaScript that do that? The answer to that is not really. back in the olden days, this is a warning too that you probably have already figured out. If you have an older computer science professor, they're going to talk about the old days every now and then. You just sort of have to you can think of pleasant thoughts if you don't care about it, all right? And just don't worry about it for a second. But in the old days, when I first started doing web developing, you could actually write client-side script in VB script. Problem with that is it only worked on Internet Explorer. Back when 99% of the world was using Internet Explorer, maybe it wasn't a bad thing. But even if you could do it now, you wouldn't, all right? Because you'd want the cross-browser compatibility. Back in the slightly more recent days, there was Flash that sort of did that, all right? It wasn't really the same as JavaScript, but it sort of allowed you to manipulate stuff on a completed web page. But as we know, Flash has gone by the wayside. So right now, I can't think of anything that manipulates a web page other than JavaScript. So manipulates a completed web page. What role does the server perform? What role does scripting perform on the server side? Yes. Exactly. Creates a web page, builds a web page, writes a web page. All right. And sends it to the user. But the scripting part writes the web page. So think if there was no server-side scripting. All right. This is a facetious example. But let's imagine there was no server-side scripting and you had to hard code every web page that was requested. So let's say that you are doing an online dictionary. All right. Now, someone could type in a word they want and it would come to you as a request on the web server. And you could see the request, but the server couldn't do anything about it. You'd have to write the own web page. So someone comes in and wants to know the meaning of the word consequence. What would you do as a web developer? Well, you look and say, this is a word that they want. They've requested the definition of the word consequence. You'd go to the dictionary, the manual dictionary. You'd look up the word consequence, find the definition, and create an HTML document that had that in, and then send it to the user. All right? You would write by hand the web page that was requested. All right? And you can extend this facetious example to if you're a catalog for a company and they typed in a product they wanted. All right. And if there was no server-side scripting, you would go and you'd by hand write the web page that the product that was requested was. Well, obviously that's not going to work, right? You're not going to have something like that that's going to work. In this case, the server plays the role of the software developer. All right. The job of the software developer is more or less to provide a template for the response. All right. If you look at, for example, Amazon, and you go and you browse their products, all the pages for Amazon looks the same, right? So if we go here, type in, go to Amazon, and look up boots. This pair of boots. All right. All the pages look essentially like this. Picture the product here. Price, description, ratings here. Similar products here. Details here. Let's go to another one of these. Same thing. Pictures here. More information here. Similar products. And so on. So all of these pages, it doesn't matter what the page is. You go to a page about, look for books on Amazon. The page is still going to roughly fit this template. Now, there could be some small tweaks to it. Like, for example, this one has an Amazon store associated with it. So the page might look a little bit different than some other item. But the basic design of the page is going to look the same. What's different is how that template gets filled in. All right. You make a request for a given product when you click a link to it. All right. So I typed in, let's say, JavaScript books. Clicking this is making a request. Some of the details of that request are made up here as part of the URL. All right. Well, we've made a request for a particular product. The server-side script takes that request, does whatever it needs to do to fill in the template that the developer gave it. So the software developer at Amazon creates a template for this is how a product page looks. All right. The server-side script fills in that template with data that typically it pulls from a database. Data it pulls from the database. So it's important to understand this. It's important to understand this because it sort of dictates how these languages can interact with each other. All right. Remembering that JavaScript works on a completed web page and server-side script works in terms of building a page. Like, for example, a question I often get in this class is, should I write this via JavaScript or PHP? All right. Well, the answer to that question is going to be, are you talking about something that relates to the building of the page or the changing of an existing page? And again, the water gets muddied when you talk about Ajax, which we'll talk about in a second. But forgetting about Ajax for now, are you building the page? Are you providing content? Or are you changing something about a completed web page? That dictates whether it's going to be done on the server or the client. Now, what are the languages that are used in server-side scripting? We already mentioned one, PHP, which we're using in this class, which is an older language. I've often thought about changing that. We're not changing it right this semester. It's possible in future semesters. We have an advisory committee that we ask like stuff about our curriculum, people from business. And they've essentially told us that server-side scripting kind of works the same no matter what platform you're on. So it doesn't really matter what you teach, right? Another one that's popular now is Python. ASP.NET is popular. JavaScript can be used on the server side in addition to being used on the client side, and so on. So you have more choices on the server side. Why does that make sense? That you'd have more choices on the server side than on the client side? How many systems need to understand JavaScript? How many systems need to understand client-side scripting or JavaScript? Well, you say just the browser, but how many systems? Every client in the world has to understand that, okay? So everyone has to understand JavaScript, all right? You're right, the server has to understand it, I suppose, but the client-side scripting, every client needs to understand the client-side scripting. So if you had 2 or 3 standards, that wouldn't work very well, right? If you had 2 or 3 ways of doing something, that wouldn't work very well. And again, that's why I've mentioned alternatives to JavaScript have dropped away. VBScript was an alternative. That disappeared. Flash was an alternative. That disappeared. And you could list a bunch of reasons why they disappeared. The bottom line of it, at least in my opinion, is since everyone needs to understand it, let's do it once. Let's only have one thing to choose from and just get it right. All right, do whatever we need to do to get it right. And you can do amazing things in JavaScript these days. I've written code that does animation using a third-party edition of JavaScript. That is amazing. All right, and it's amazing to me that this could all be done in JavaScript, considering where JavaScript was originally. So they've put everything in JavaScript that you would want to have that used to be in Flash or whatever. How many entities need to understand the server-side script? Just one, all right? Just the web server. So that web server is running PHP. Client doesn't need to understand PHP. Why not? Because the client doesn't execute the PHP code. The server does. The client gets, no matter what language is used on the other end, the client gets back a web page, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are all the things that that client understands. Are there any questions about this? All right. When I say a scripting language, I'm talking about more than HTML or CSS. I'm talking about things that can actually do all the things that you do in other programming languages. Loops, variables, if statements, and so on. What I like to do at the end of this class is start talking about JavaScript with a couple simple JavaScript examples, which some of which I covered similar to in CISS 216. So this will probably be review for many of you, but let's go over a couple simple JavaScript examples. I have been using, oh, by the way, and for an example of client-side scripting, boom, that, right? In other words, those ratings get downloaded when the web page gets downloaded. They're just invisible. I put my mouse over it, boom. All right, that's a tip off to you that those were there all along. They just weren't being displayed. All right, so let's go. And I'm going to use I've been big on using Visual Studio Code since last semester. All right. Visual Studio Code is sort of like Notepad++, except like a lot better. So things such as like closing tags for you, it does. Things like showing you a syntax error. If you make a syntax error, it does. So it's not a graphical interface where you drag and build things that way, which I don't like. But it does give you a little bit of a help. And okay, I'll concede to using this instead of just plain old Notepad or Notepad++. So I'm going to go in here and open this up. And I'm going to create a new file. By the way, I ask you to be patient with me this semester because I'm still working through these things, and I'll try to return the favor by being patient with you. All right, that's all I can say. Let me go and like, this is kind of awkward. It's almost like a little mini game. I have to go up there and if I was sharper on the keyboard shortcuts, I could do this easier. So let's go and let's create our web page. So I'm going to start off. I'm hoping this is review for you. Doc type HTML. Oops. Interesting thing is it's not doing any IntelliSense for me yet because it doesn't know the kind of document it is. As soon as I save this as a .html document, it's going to know, oh, that's a web page he's working on. I was wondering why it wasn't doing stuff for me, but that's why. Okay, I'm going to write a simple web page just to change the color of the page. Not terribly useful. I have a feeling I'm doing something wrong. We'll soon find out. I think this is background. PG. All right, let me save this. Save it on the desktop. And I'm going to call it javascript.html. And I'm saving it as type plain text instead of any of these other. Oh, I lied. I'm going to save it as HTML. Oh, now notice it color codes things and gives us help and all that. So I go here, double click on it, use Google Chrome, and it doesn't work. How are we going to figure out what? How are we going to figure out what's going wrong and how do we fix it? I'll tell you, there's two ways that we can figure it out. One way is to open your code and stare at it until the answer jumps into your head. All right. I'm being facetious, but I've used that technique too. Right? I mean, everyone uses that technique. But as you can imagine, it's not terribly effective. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to look to see what errors they've got. Because if it didn't work, there's probably an error. So go to More Tools. This is within Google Chrome. Every browser has something similar. Developer Tools. Console. No error. Yet it didn't work. So we're going to rely on our friend Google. Document body and style. Wow, definitely have the programming rust today. Document dot body dot style. I don't mind like showing you that I don't know everything, because you'd figure it out quick enough anyhow. All right. But also it sort of shows that there's no shame in not knowing everything. Don't know it off the top of their head, right? Develop skills, though, that can get you the answer. And people joke about, like, as a software developer, you just got to know how to Google stuff. People joke about that, but, you know, there's a little bit of truth in there. All right, there really is. All right, so I save it and refresh. New page source. Oh, yeah. This is the start of my 20th year teaching, by the way. And had this be the start of my 25th year, and I was a little bit wiser, I would have said I put that error in there on purpose for you to see if you could find the error. I'm really surprised it didn't give me an error, though, the console. But anyhow, not the first time I'll be surprised. It doesn't change it back when we pull it out. Let's briefly look at this, because this is going to be the recipe for our JavaScript. Again, not always, but a lot of the time. On mouse over, that is an event. An event is when a user does something. Remember, we talked about JavaScript as providing behavior or interactivity. All right. Another way to say that is the user does something or something happens and the page responds to it. So on, and there's a list of things that you can say: on click, on mouse over, on mouse out. You can put code in to do something. We then have, and as was mentioned by Michael, you have a DOM expression. The DOM expression is simply a way of referring to the stuff on the page. Document means somewhere on the page. What do we want to change about the document? We want to change the body of it. What aspect of the body? It's about the appearance, so it's the style. What about the style we're going to change? And its background color. Now, here's a little bit of an inconsistency between JavaScript and CSS, because in CSS, it's background dash color, whereas whenever you have a dash in JavaScript, you omit it and capitalize the next word. So instead of background dash color like it is in CSS, in JavaScript, it will be background capital C color. And then we have equals the value that we want to set it to. So to summarize, event DOM equals attribute will change the appearance of a page by changing one of the attributes. All right, first day of class and I'm running overtime. I hope you didn't think I was one of those people that like just talk for 5 minutes and dismisses you on the first day. All right. It's been almost 2 years, man. I'm happy to be back. So, all right. That's all I had. The lab is up in BU 210. Again, you're not required to come to lab, but please do read the material in Canvas and you can start on the assignment. Questions? All right. See you up there.